Good evening. Hi, my name is Victor Bashini, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Texas Christian University and to Landreth Hall. It's a delight to welcome all of you to the 4th annual Schieffer Symposium of Journalism. The theme for this year's symposium is Campaign 08 About the Right Stuff? We are honored to host such a distinguished panel of journalists to consider this important issue. And I also want to thank all of you for being with us as we consider this issue. It's my great pleasure tonight to introduce Bob Schieffer, who will moderate this evening's symposium, and also to express my appreciation to both Pat and Bob Schieffer for making this symposium possible. Of course, we all know Bob is a celebrated journalist and a best-selling author. He is the host of Face the Nation and delivered strong ratings while serving as the interim anchor for the CBS Evening News. He has won virtually every top award in his profession. And as journalism's most experienced Washington reporter and also a moderator, he was chosen to lead one of the 2004 presidential debates. 3 years ago at Texas Christian University, the Schieffer School of Journalism was named for Mr. Schieffer. He's a member of the class of 1959, was distinguished alumnus in 1977, and is also the recipient of an honorary doctorate from Texas Christian University in 1986. Having our School of Journalism linked to one of the premier broadcast journalists in the world is a responsibility we do not take lightly. We're committed to ensuring that the Schieffer name and the Schieffer School of Journalism is held high. And in Bob's words, we're going to create the best journalism school in the nation. Please help me in welcoming Bob Schieffer.
Thank you all. Oh, thank you. Enough. Thank you all for coming, and thanks for that great welcome. You haven't even seen my socks yet. I feel purple tonight from head to toe, literally. Well, we've got another great panel assembled tonight, and they're all friends of mine, and I'm just thrilled and honored that they, in their busy schedules, could find the time to come down here. The first person I want to introduce is, I don't know many geniuses, but this man is a genius. He started out as a reporter for the Associated Press. He later went to work for the Gannett newspaper chain. He became the CEO and chairman of Gannett. He later became the chairman of the Freedom Forum, and it was his idea to start the museum, which is getting ready to have its grand opening in Washington. And when you come to Washington, I mean, if you weren't even planning to come to Washington, you want to come to Washington to see the museum. He is also, in this time when people wonder about the fate of newspapers, he founded and created a newspaper, a national newspaper, when people said, will a national newspaper work in this country? This is the founder of USA Today, my good friend Al Newhart. Thank you very much, Jeff. There are reporters and there are reporters, and reporters know who the real reporters are. They know who the ones are that check they base their stories on actual calling people up and doing reporting. There may be 2 or 3 around who don't really do that much anymore. But the next person I'm going to introduce has always been a reporter's reporter. He started out working for a wire service when he was in high school. He, too, later worked for the Associated Press, went on from there to the Wall Street Journal, and then back in the 60s started a daily column, 3 days a week, a column based on reporting with someone named Roland Evans. Bob Novak, who has just written a book about 50 years as a reporter. It's called The Prince of Darkness. The very irascible, sometimes controversial, but always someone who bases his reporting on facts. Bob Novak, who has now written with the death last month of William F. Buckley, Bob Novak's column is now the longest running column in American journalism. So, and finally, when I came to CBS in 1969 and was hired and walked into the newsroom there, I felt like a little leaguer who'd suddenly been called up to pinch hit at Yankee Stadium, because there in this one room were all the people who had been my heroes. White House correspondent Dan Rather, State Department correspondent Marvin Kalb, General Assignments reporter Daniel Shore, Supreme Court reporter George Herman, and then over and above all of that, Eric Sevareid. But the strongest reporter in that bureau, he was number one in that bureau in those days. He still remains number one in my eyes. He has just written a wonderful book about that bureau in the late 60s and early 70s. We not only, those of us who worked in the bureau, not only thought it was the best bureau in Washington, other people thought it was the best bureau in Washington. And the best of the best was Roger Mudd. Our fourth panelist who was to be here tonight was Andrea Mitchell. Last night, Andrea came down with a very serious case of the flu, and there's a flu going around in Washington that it's really awful. My wife Pat had it for 2 weeks, and she's never sick. And Andrea is heartbroken. She will not be here with us tonight, and I'm really sorry about that. But I tell you, I did some adding here, and it took a calculator to do it. I added up the ages of the panelists here. Even without Andrea Mitchell, we have 311 years of experience on this panel tonight. So, everybody I walk up to or comes up to me says the same thing. Have you ever seen a campaign like the one that we're having this year? And I must say, all of us have covered a lot of campaigns. I guess, Roger, your first one in 1964. Bob Novak, you covered in 1960. Al Newharth has covered campaigns and every other kind of story in America. Bob, you have been out on the campaign trail, so why don't I talk to you first, and let's talk about, you were in Pennsylvania, I think, last night.
Pennsylvania and North Carolina last week. Of course, you talk about campaigns. The 1860 campaign was a hell of a campaign. I wasn't around for that. But
Roger was there.
It is a very exciting campaign and a very interesting one. You know, you take all the indicators. People say the country's going the wrong way. You've got an unpopular incumbent president, an unpopular war. It's very hard for one party to win 3 elections in a row. The economy is going down. It all points to a big Democratic win. And in fact, you ask the voters, do you want a Democrat or a Republican to replace George W. Bush? And the Democrats lead by about 25 points. But we don't have that kind of election. We don't have where you vote for the party, as they do in effect in the European parliamentary system. We vote for an individual. And I think it is a most personal choice most Americans ever made. So when you don't ask, do you want a Democrat or Republican, do you want John McCain or do you want Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, it's about even. In fact, McCain in a lot of polls beats both of them. So it's a personal choice. And by sheer luck, because the Republicans are like blind people when they come to politics, by sheer luck they have nominated or about to nominate the only Republican who is electable this year. And the the Democrats are in a death struggle that nobody knows whether there's going to be a hangover from that, which will affect the voting in November.
Well, tell me just about what's the situation on the ground in Pennsylvania. Most of the polls suggest that Hillary Clinton has had a big lead there and had it for a while.
I think it is diminishing rapidly. I think she's falling like a rock. If you're a political reporter, you can sense those things, and I think she is on a downhill cycle. I think that she thought she had found a mistake by Senator Obama in his handling of this racist remarks by his spiritual advisor and minister in Chicago. But he was saved because Hillary discovered that she had bowed her head under sniper fire in Bosnia. And that kind of wiped out the preacher from Chicago. There was a famous famous correspondent for the Baltimore Sun named Frank Kent, and he was before our time, but he had a very acid tongue, and he once said that how can you tell when a politician lies? It's when he moves his lips, and and so a lot of people think that Hillary was lying. I take the opposite view. I think she really thinks that she was shot at by sniper fire. But she is falling. Pennsylvania should be a state that she wins easily. If she carries it, it'd be taken for granted. If she loses Pennsylvania, that may be the end.
But do you think there's actually a possibility that she could lose?
I think there is a possibility, yes.
Roger, what do you think about that? Now, you've been taking kind of a long view. You've been watching a lot of campaigns. We hear, all these things about people saying the Democrats are tearing themselves apart. Oh, you can't go into a convention and have a big knockdown, drag-out fight without hurting the party. As a matter of fact, that's how we used to sort of do it.
Well, I think if the stars were ever aligned for a Democratic victory, they are aligned now with the issues of the economy, the unpopular president, unpopular war. But I think that if indeed Hillary Clinton and Barack make some compromise, some understanding, and the contest goes all the way to the convention, the Democratic nomination would not be worth the paper it's written on. I think McCain becomes a credible candidate. I think the one thing that's against it is his age, with the enormous number of young people who have turned out and have registered in this campaign. I think he would have a tough time carrying youthful.
What do you mean when you say you think if it goes to a big fight at the convention that the nomination might not be worth very much?
What I mean is I think what most people in America want after 8 years of Bush, they want transparency, and they want unity, and they want some feeling of compromise. I think they're tired. They're tired.
Is his microphone not working here?
Working in and out. In and out. Well, that's the way it's been. So what part of me did you hear?
I think they're getting it now. No. I think you're going to have to kind of, it sounds like when you move that way.
I really didn't say much. No, what I think the American people are.
No. I tell you what, let me.
Is the School of Communications here?
I tell you what, while we kind of work on Roger's microphone, there he is.
Sorry. You give me your name, please. this before for this bigger crowd. It's
I apologize.
look at this.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, let's
Let's go to Al.
Let's turn to you, Al, and find out, number one, if your microphone is working, and
If you're lucky, it probably isn't.
what do you think about this campaign so far? And do you think the title of this symposium is this campaign about the right things? I mean, I think in many ways that it is. I think up until we got to this, business in Bosnia and the talk of the minister, I think they really were focusing on some pretty serious issues. How do you feel about the way it's going, and is it going the way it ought to?
First of all, I want to make clear that I'm absolutely politically independent. Have been since I was a kid. I think the issues that are being focused on now, the economy, Iraq, are going to be secondary in the fall.
Really?
And I think the real issue in the fall will be not race or gender or sex, but age.
Really?
And before I expand on that a little bit, I'm 84. And I remember when I was 71. And I think I see in McCain every day, every time he's on the air, some of the things that happened to me in my early 70s. Most of you are too young to know this, although Roger might have some recollection. You're getting there. You're getting there. But when I was in my early 70s, I began to forget things. I began to be a little bit confused. I don't think I would have mixed up the Shiites and the Sunnis, but there were things that I had some problems with. And early in the morning, then and now, at age 84, I think I'm pretty good, pretty alert. Until after I have my afternoon nap, I start dragging. And at night after 9 o'clock, you wouldn't want me picking up the red phone. So while I'm an admirer of John McCain's, I think age will be the major factor this fall.
Well, you wrote a op-ed piece about this, or a column, not too long ago, and what you proposed what should be done about it.
Well, I suggested that since the Constitution says that you must be 35 years old to be eligible to be president, there should be, since that's the minimum age, there should be a maximum. And I suggested it be 65.
I think if they detached surgically Joe Lieberman and Lindsey Graham from John McCain, I think he'd be in trouble.
Novak, what do you think about
Well,
that?
I disagree with all of that. I think John McCain is far more knowledgeable than Senator Obama about what's going on in the world, what's going on around the country. I was with Senator Obama the other day, and he said that he believes a woman should have the choice on abortion, and that but she should confer with her priest. Now, if you really think that somebody should confer with their priest when they're going to have an abortion, you're making a little mistake. I think he makes a lot of mistakes. I think he is extremely inexperienced, and I believe that John McCain is a tough customer. I've watched him very carefully in the Senate, and the reason he's so popular in the Senate is he has fought the pork barrel senators in both parties, trying to use their office to get federal spending into their state and district. If you like that kind of government, you don't like John McCain. He saved the country millions of dollars by uncovering the Boeing deal, which sent 2 people to prison. Now, having said all that, I don't believe, as I say, that this is a very personal choice for some people, but I really believe that what is involved is two styles of government and two philosophies of government. And they're both reasonable and decent, but they are different. They're a choice for what kind of government the American people want. Do you want a government that redistributes income from the rich to the poor? Do you want a government that has a lot of regulation and a lot more spending, a lot more helping of people who say they need help? Those are all reasonable things. Or do you want a government that gives more incentives to the successful, incentives to investors, has made this the most profitable country in the world? It has made it the country that other people want to live in because we have less government, we have lower taxes, and we don't worry about redistributing income. Those are really what this campaign is about, and most people will make a personal choice, I believe, and that's why I think Senator McCain is doing very well. I think people like Senator McCain. He is a hero, but I think the real choice should be made on that basis. And sometimes people say, how do you decide who you vote for president? And I tell people, you really aren't going to know what these people are like. You're just going to see an image of them. Vote for the candidate who agrees with you, whatever you think. That's what you should vote for.
You know, I think a lot of times the vice president and who is put on the ticket is sort of an afterthought, and it's one of the main things that candidates seem to do is they don't want to, number one, put somebody on the ticket that sort of overshadows them. They don't want to put somebody on the ticket that might mess up in some way. But it seems to me that for three totally different reasons, each of these candidates, whoever winds up with the Democratic nomination and Senator McCain, who they put on the ticket is going to be very important. I mean, to my way of thinking, if Hillary Clinton should somehow get the nomination, she will have gotten it. There's no way she cannot have bruised a lot of feelings in the black community. And it may be that the only way she can get a big black turnout, and I don't think a Democrat can win unless he or she gets a big black vote, is to put Barack Obama on the ticket with her. I didn't start out this campaign thinking that, but that's what I've come to believe. Senator Obama, it seems to me, has an entirely different problem. He needs to put somebody on the ticket who has experience, but I think the main thing he needs to do is put somebody on the ticket from the South who can carry at least one southern state. I think that'll be very important for him. Someone, for example, like Sam Nunn, former senator from Georgia. He's still the most popular politician in the state. He probably could carry Georgia in the way that Lyndon Johnson was able to carry Texas for John Kennedy. Hillary Clinton, well, I mentioned her, and then you talk also about McCain. I think what Al says, I think is going to be an issue, and I think I'm the same age as John McCain. Like John McCain, I'm a cancer survivor. I think he has to put somebody on that ticket that people are confident can become president should there be some health problem. How do you see this election of vice president, Roger?
I can't imagine.
No, yeah.
You really want me here, Bob?
Listen, maybe I'll loan you my socks.
Can you hear me? I can't imagine Barack Obama agreeing to go on the ticket with Hillary Clinton.
Why not?
Because Bill Clinton will be living in the White House. And I just think that his role, as minor as most vice presidents' roles, his role and his importance would be virtually preempted by Bill Clinton. I can't imagine he would do that.
Do you think he'd go on the ticket, Al? Obama would go on the ticket if Hillary Clinton gets the nomination.
No, I don't think either one of them will be on the ticket with the other one.
You don't?
No, I think Hillary, as you said, needs somebody who can help her in the South. I think that's likely to be Senator Bill Nelson of Florida. I think Obama might do the same thing. I think there's a key young senator from the South there that could carry the state of Florida, which is critical.
Mm-hmm. We said the same thing. We said the same thing in 1964, or 1960, when nobody believed. You can't hear me, can you? 1960. We said the same thing when nobody believed that Lyndon Johnson would go on the ticket with Jack Kennedy, but he did, and I suppose that when they come to you, vanity would take over, and it's very hard to refuse. I just think under those circumstances, though, the present circumstances, that Obama would not do that.
What do you think, Bob? Who do you think, let's start with McCain. Who do you think he'd put on the ticket? Maybe Charlie Crist, the governor of Florida?
I'm going to answer that in a minute, but let me make a caveat on vice presidents. The only, in the more than 50 years I've covered politics, the only vice presidential candidate who had any influence one way or the other on the outcome of the election was Lyndon Johnson in 1960, and Kennedy would not have won without LBJ carrying Texas and stopping Nixon from carrying Mississippi and Alabama. But usually there are 49 hours in which the vice presidential candidate is important. It's the first 48 hours, the first 2 days after he's named, and he's in the headlines, and then there's another hour when they have the national debate, and then you forget about him for the rest of the time. So I don't think it's that important. Obviously, you have to have a much younger person than McCain as his running mate, but that's not very hard to find a much younger person. That's not difficult at all. Talking to the people around McCain, and this doesn't mean anything because he hasn't made up his mind and won't make it up, they're talking about somebody who I'll bet hardly anybody in this audience had ever heard of. His name is Rob Portman. He is a former congressman from Ohio. He was a member of the House Republican leadership. He resigned from the House to become U.S. Trade Representative. He then left that and became director of the Office of Management and Budget, where he had the best budget policy that Bush had in his 8 years. And he's 52 years old, looks a little younger, good-looking guy, very smart, very articulate, conservative but not abrasive. And nobody knows him. They'll know him after he's on television wall to wall when he's named, and they will like him very much. I'm not saying he'll be named, but that's what they're talking about. The most interesting choice they're talking about is the new governor of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, who is the son of Indian immigrants. He is a Catholic convert. He is charismatic. He won in a landslide in Louisiana as a Republican. He had a spectacularly successful special session of the legislature. His problem is he just became governor, and he's only 36 years old. Maybe that's a little too young, but that's a possibility. They talk about him. A lot of the conservatives in the party really like him very much. I don't think it's going to be Mitt Romney. There's a lot of other governors who are so-so. I'm not going to go down the laundry list, but it hasn't been decided. And I want to say something about the Democratic governorship. I don't think Hillary's going to be nominated. If she was, I agree with the people here who say that I don't believe that Obama would go on the ticket with her. But he has no intention, if he is nominated, and I think he will be, of naming her as vice president, because I'm just going to make a joke. Don't get upset. I don't think that if Obama becomes president, he wants to hire a taster during his presidency. That's just a joke, folks. Don't get upset by it. But so who would he name? Now, you named Sam Nunn. The day when Sam Nunn could carry Georgia are long gone. There's no chance of the Democrats carrying Georgia. It's been a long time since Sam Nunn ran in Georgia. Putting people on to carry the state, except for Lyndon Johnson, seldom works. Al Gore, when he was running for president, couldn't even carry his own state of Tennessee. the state that the Democrats need to win the election are not moving into the South. What they have to do is they have to win Ohio, they have to win Colorado. Al did mention Florida, which isn't quite a southern state. That's going to be up there. I don't know if Bill Nelson turns it around or not. So I think the main reason for putting Sam Nunn on is that he knows so much more about government and foreign policy, but I'm not sure that's a good fit. It doesn't just feel like a good fit, and I haven't seen anybody who really that fits very well with Obama. Bill Nelson is a nice fella, but if you go up to the Senate and you ask people about Bill Nelson as President of the United States, they kind of think about Dan Quayle. You know,
What about Bill Richardson on the Democratic side, a.k.a. Judas Iscariot, as he was recently named? You know, it's a very interesting thing. James Carville, of course, who's very close to the Clintons, when Bill Richardson, as you all know, endorsed Obama, called him Judas Iscariot. And what was kind of interesting about that is usually when people sort of pop off like that, they will back down and say, well, and he didn't back down at all. He said, well, it was Easter time. That's why I called him that. And he went on to say in an op-ed piece in the Washington Post, had it been the 4th of July, I would have called him Benedict Arnold. And so what do you think? How do you see the running mate thing shaping up, Al?
Well, as I say, I don't think Obama would pick Clinton. I don't think Hillary would pick Obama. I think McCain has to pick somebody younger, maybe not somebody in their 30s, but somebody younger. I think that Ohio and Pennsylvania are critical, Michigan, but I also think, as we've learned, Florida really is a state that can go either way. And
what's your sense of what's going on in Florida? You live in Florida a good part of the year.
Well, I don't think the Democrats generally are as upset about the fact that they might not be seated at the convention as the leading political figures are.
Let's talk about the issue that really hasn't gotten as much attention lately. Some people say that's because the news has been good from there, but we've seen a sudden flare-up in Iraq. What's going to happen? What's going to happen in Iraq? We're going to end the year with at least 100,000 troops there, perhaps as many as 130,000. Things did calm down when we put more troops in there. But has it gotten any better in your view, Al? I mean, someone made the comparison. When you put a cop on every corner, you're going to keep crime down on that corner. But the question is, can we keep a cop on every corner? Clearly, we don't have an army, military large enough to keep the number of troops we had in Iraq. We had to begin bringing them back in July. And now, with this sudden upsurge in violence, when the Iraqi government decided to attack one of the leading militias, they basically were beaten back. They had to get a truce there. Are we going to be in Iraq? John McCain says for 50 years. The Democrats are saying we've got to begin some sort of a withdrawal, but they've been vague on what kind of a timetable. Where do you see that going now?
I think 6 months ago, the general public thought Iraq was the number one issue. Now I think the economy is, you take the SCIF today, when you have concern about student loans, the economy certainly is a bigger factor with most people now than Iraq. I think that could change by fall. I think if we continue to see an unstable Iraq, and it certainly is not stable, that may become as big an issue. And you know, frankly, I have great respect for my colleague here to the right, but if John McCain at 71 and Iraq looks worse, and he wants us to be present there for another 100 years, then he's dead.
Well, he doesn't want us to be present here for 100 years. That was an offhand remark he made.
Well, he makes so many offhand remarks. That's the
no,
point.
He doesn't make many. He just gets reported a little more carefully in the press than the offhand remarks of the Democrats are reported, in my opinion, at least. But if you look at the transcript, which they never say what he said next, he said that they could be around for 100 years, but he was sure that wouldn't be the case. They never put that on. The situation is that I was against moving into Iraq. I didn't believe that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with the 9/11. I was against him because I didn't believe he had weapons of mass destruction. And all I didn't have a secret information agency. I just read the reports of the UN inspectors. So I thought it was a huge mistake by President Bush to go in, and I said so. I told him that, and I haven't been invited to the White House since. But once you are there, it isn't like, this was a mistake, we got to get out. We have a lot of friends there and a lot of people who have risked their lives to be our supporters, and to set a deadline, as Senator Obama and Senator Clinton want to do, and an early deadline of getting out is just a guarantee of chaos. So I would hope that there has to be a more measured way of getting out, and I really do believe that Senator Obama, as a reasonable person, would back away once he's president from setting a tough deadline for getting out. The fact of the matter is that this fighting against the militia is being done by Iraqis, not by Americans. We're having air support, and we've had some tanks come in, but our troops are not fighting. It's really a civil war going on, and the truce that was enacted was done through the good offices of the evil villains in Iran. And there's no question that the United States and the Iraqi government are having some backroom deals with Iran, and they have tried to control the situation. There's a lot of things going on there that we don't know what's going on, and the reporters who work very hard to try to get it right don't know what's going on either. Let's be very honest. The reason why this is not as big an issue as it might be is we don't have a draft. If we had a draft as we did in Vietnam, people would be up in arms because Johnny would be going off against his will to fight in this war. So that's why Charlie Rangel and other people are saying we must have a draft, because we wouldn't engage in adventures such as this. But I don't think it is going. I don't think this is going to be the issue that settles this election. I tend to agree with Al that it is going to be largely the economy as the issue. But I really do believe, I'm going to be very frank and honest, it's going to be the question of whether the American people are ready for an African American president, whether there is still prejudice, whether they think that John McCain is too old or not. And I can guarantee you, if you don't like mean, nasty politics, ladies and gentlemen, you ain't seen nothing yet. This campaign is going to really get rough and raunchy because the stakes are very high and there's going to be a lot of mud thrown.
Now, are you talking about before the Democratic nomination is
after the nomination?
After you're talking about the general election in November. You think that, Roger?
First, I'd like to. Al and I are delighted to be on the Bob Novak show. I agree. I have to agree. I hate to agree, but I agree that. Suppose I can meet after and tell you what I said. I agree with Bob. I think the campaign will be as rough as we've seen. I think circumstances.
When you face this way, Roger, we can hear you. It's just microphone.
Okay. Is that? No, I just to shorten it up. I agree with Novak.
Here we go.
All right.
Well, I think Iraq is going to be an issue, and I'm not sure I agree. I think the economy will be there. I certainly do agree with Bob about why we're not hearing more about it. Just to underline what Bob said, because we don't have a draft, we now have 1% of the American people who are shouldering the entire burden, who are making the sacrifice in this war. And I, for one, am not sure that that's a good thing for a democracy. I don't think we should engage in wars, and I'm just stating an opinion here, unless the sacrifice is equally shared. And whether that has to do with some sort of national service or some sort of other commitment, I just don't think it's part when everybody is supposed to be equal in a democracy, that we put this kind of a burden on a small number of people. Even though it's an all-volunteer force, it's the most powerful and the best army we have ever had. I'm not advocating a draft, but I think we all, in my view, I think we should rethink this idea of putting all of this sacrifice and all of this burden on such a tiny, tiny part of our society.
I would add that to say that the war in Iraq is not the dominant issue is to tell the mothers and the fathers of the 4,000 who have died, and the mothers and the fathers and the families of the 35,000 who have been maimed and wounded and whose lives have been torn apart. Seems to me that makes it a major, major issue.
We want to take some questions from the audience, and I'm told that we cannot raise the lights in the house, that is some sort of an electrical impossibility, but we have we have put microphones, I believe, somewhere down here. So we're going to continue. I'll continue asking some questions here, and then while I'm asking the questions, why don't those of you, here come the microphones, why don't those of you who have something on your mind, we'll take some questions from you. Let me just, before we get to questions from the audience, and let me ask you about this, Al. How well do you think the press is doing these days? Newspapers are facing some really serious problems, and not so much in many cases journalistically, but finding the sources of revenue to maintain these very expensive enterprises that mainstream newspapers are. Bill Keller, who is was our guest here at this panel last year, the editor of the New York Times, told me that the New York Times spends $2.5 million a year just on the security, to pay for the security to maintain their bureau in Baghdad. Now, you're talking about spending a lot of money when you have to spend $2.5 million just on the security for one bureau. And are newspapers going to be able to continue to do this, Al?
Well, I think newspapers are going through a dip in terms of their revenue and their popularity, but we've seen it before. We saw it when radio came in, or some of us did, Ronald Reagan and I. Ronald Reagan and I remember that. When television came in, that was the death of newspapers. Now it's the internet. I think the difference is that most newspaper owners are now recognizing that this is the digital age and that the internet is here to stay. And instead of fighting it, they're beginning to use it. They haven't yet figured out how to make it pay. But I think once they can establish for the public that there's a difference between legitimate online stuff and the bloggers, which are mostly a bunch of baloney, although I'm all for that. Ben Franklin's pamphlets were baloney too. But I think the owners of newspapers are recognizing that there is a great hunger for news and information in total, and that they're going to have to figure out how they can make the use of the internet pay for them. And I think that will happen.
I think if I can pick up just on the television side, I think generally, at least in this campaign, the commercial television networks have generally left the field of political reporting and have turned it over to the cable companies. I may be wrong, but just as a consumer at home trying to follow the campaigns, I find myself listening more and more to cable and less to the commercial television stations, the networks. The night of the Ohio and Texas primaries, I don't think the networks were on that night, except for maybe 5-minute cut-ins. After a while, the torrent of words is so overwhelming, and everybody's saying the same thing hour after hour. My wife and I tried to watch it, and we were just overcome by the verbiage. All we wanted to know is who won.
But you know, I think that the networks on their evening news programs have given generally good coverage. But I agree with you that the cables, I think, have just done an extraordinary job, and I think they should be congratulated, mainly because of the debates that they have held. I mean, we've had 20 some odd debates now. We've never had a campaign where we had that many debates. And you know, you can only do so many stories on the evening news, but if you're in a state where you're having a primary, you're going to be so overwhelmed by campaign commercials that I don't care how careful you try to be about reading the newspapers and watching the evening news, you're still going to wind up most of the information you get, and some of it will be involuntary, it's just beating you from all sides, is going to come from the campaign commercials. But it seems to me that the one thing that's been a counterweight to that has been these debates. And we know people have been watching them. We both know people have been paying close attention. In the very beginning, when you had 10 or 12 people out there, they were just soundbite contests, but at least you were getting a feel for these people. And as the fields have been narrowed down and windowed down, I think these debates, I think they've just performed a really good public service.
Yeah, I think the debates have become, at least in this campaign, the debates have provide the raw material of campaign coverage, as opposed in the old days, it was airport rallies and speeches at the field house. But now it is the debates that contain the raw material for good reporting.
How do you think? What do you think? Is the press doing a good job? You're a pundit, Bob Novak. Do you think we're doing a good job? What should we do better?
I think it's very hard. Every reporter wants to cover politics. You know that. You did it, I did, but I think it's one of the hardest things to cover. I think it's harder to cover than foreign policy or economics, because it's all a shadow play that the candidates are putting out there. And what do you report and what do you analyze? A lot of newspapers, Washington Post does a very good job at it, try to analyze how many lies are told by the politicians. They have one very good reporter assigned to it, and he gives Pinocchios. He gave Hillary 4 Pinocchios for the Bosnia story. So I think it's tough. I don't really think you get reading the papers and listening to cable, which Roger is right, does most of the reporting. Now, I don't think you really get a terribly accurate impression of what in the world is going on out there, and people have to make their own impressions. I would like to answer your first question you gave to Al, and that is that being in Washington and having been a Washington correspondent for 50 years, the decline of the Washington bureaus, I think, is very alarming, where Baltimore Sun has gone from 15 reporters to 5. They're going to go smaller than that. Dallas Morning News is down to 3, and they may be out. My home paper, Schieffer Symposium, has 1 reporter now, and there are fewer and fewer. So who is increasing their number? Well, the Bloomberg News has 100 reporters in Washington right now, and that's because they got a lot of money. And what are they giving the public that they can afford 100 newspapers, 100 reporters? And what they're giving them is a lot of detailed information on markets, on speeches, less interpretation and less facts. I don't know I'm not a news executive. I'm just a humble a reporter, but I don't know what the answer to that is. But if I was a news executive, I'd wonder why Bloomberg is so successful.
It's the first time I've ever heard Bob Novak described as a humble reporter.
All right, well, let's go to the audience here.
May I ask a question that doesn't have to do with the campaign?
Okay.
Anything.
Each morning when I have breakfast, I read the Star Telegram. And 1 week ago, in the front section and the back pages was an article about Cheney, Iran working on weapons-grade uranium. And my first impression when I just saw the headline was, what kind of fabrication is the Vice President going to give? And it went on where he would say that Iran is trying to develop weapon-grade uranium, although international inspectors and U.S. intelligence services have not found any such evidence. And after I read the article, I thought to myself, I said, you know, how sad it is. I mean, I'm an older gentleman, and I can remember when I was a child, I had a portrait of Dwight D. Eisenhower in my room, hanging on the wall. And now, I don't even trust our president. I don't trust our vice president. I'm skeptical of whenever they say something. And I think it's sad that I have come to that point. And I'm wondering, I don't think I am just alone in that impression outside of the Beltway. And I'm wondering, what is the impression of the administration inside the Beltway, and especially inside the media's impression inside the Beltway?
Who'd like to answer that? Well, I mean, I would tell you what I think the answer to that is, and the way you correct that is they have elections every 4 years, and you'll have a chance to, to express your opinion about that. I think the administration's credibility has been questioned. I mean, when they told me that Saddam Hussein had a weapon of mass destruction, I believed him. I was not like Bob Novak. He was against going into Iraq. I was for going into Iraq. I later came to believe that was a mistake. But, it's just like when you're a journalist. If Novak writes one column that is incorrect, you give him another chance. But if he writes 3 in a row, you probably don't read him very much after that. In the same way with me on television. And I think when administrations get to the point that people question their credibility, that's when administrations change. I think it's the most important thing that an administration has.
Go ahead.
I think the credibility of this administration is in tatters. I think that and Republicans who are up for re-election are very worried that they'll get wiped out this year because of this lack of credibility. What the American people, it seems to me, want is a transparency and a candor that they have not had for the last 4 to 5 years.
Let me say that I think that the credibility is low, but I must say that I don't like to sound cynical or at all, but all these administrations have had low credibility. Though some of you maybe remember the LBJ administration, and the question, even in the sainted Kennedy administration, there was a question of lying. You remember the issues of lying in the early years of the administration? So they don't tell the truth very much. I think the matter of what is going on in Iran is very difficult to ascertain, and I don't know who's right on that. What I do know is that it would be insane to try to have a military intervention in Iran. They've war-gamed Iran at the Pentagon for 20 years, and it always ends up in a disaster for the United States. But I do believe that there's a great problem for the American people if they put all their faith in government. I sometimes give commencement addresses, and I get in trouble because I always tell the people, the students, as a parting advice from an old reporter, always love your country, but never trust your government.
Over here.
Well, we've heard that the issues are primarily Iraq,
and the economy, and of course we're learning that we've got an impending recession, it seems, apparently on the way. But and age may be a factor also in the general election, but I'm very concerned about the control, or the seeming or apparent control, that China has on the strength of the dollar, the value of the dollar worldwide, and I'm wondering why our candidates their feet are not held to the fire in terms of the Chinese relations and what's going on there, and the trade deficit and the problems that are getting larger and larger and larger with particularly China.
Well, Al Newhart, are you our China expert here tonight? Would you like
No, I'm not a China expert. I do think that China is the USSR now. China is not only a big factor financially, but China is going to lead us in space in a few years. And just as Sputnik scared the hell out of us when the Russians launched it, I think we will be shocked by China militarily in space more than we will financially.
I would just add, we talk about Iraq, we talk about the economy, but I think overall, when you look at the broadest and most important problem out there, is our relationship with China. How are we going to deal with China? How are we going to coexist with China? I think that's something that not just this next administration, but the administration after that will be dealing with. I think it's a very good question and a very good point that you raised. Over here?
Yes. Roger Mudd, I'd like to say that you've been one of my heroes for a long time. It was a pleasure to hear you on the Diane Reeves show, and congratulations on your new book. And the question I have for all of you is, considering the last 8 years with the Rovian politics and the rise of Rovian politics, that 50% plus one person campaign strategy, do you see some interesting dynamics with the kind of race for the middle, the race for the moderate vote this year? The race for the independent vote, if you will.
Oh, I think the question was, is there a race for the middle, the independent? I think the independent vote is critical, absolutely. And I think the edges are being smoothed off and everybody's moving toward the center. I think without the independent vote, particularly John McCain.
Well, let me ask Novak, I want to get his take on that. Do you think that McCain will run in the fall to try to reach to the middle, or will he try to do what the Karl Rove strategy, and that is that the success, the secret to winning is to solidify the base? I mean, he's never been too popular with the base, quite frankly.
Well, I think the base is going to be solidified against Senator Obama. The problem that he is going to have is not the base. The Christian conservatives and those kind of people may not be in love with Senator McCain. They're not in love with Senator McCain. But you know what? The old Borscht Belt comedian Henny Youngman used to start his routine with a little gag. They'd say, "How's your wife?" And he'd say, "Compared to what?" And that's what they say about McCain. You know, how's McCain compared to what? Compared to Obama, he looks pretty good. So the fight is going to be where are these centrist votes going to go? And frankly, are they going to pick an old white man, a little cantankerous, or a very inexperienced African American? And I think it is going to be, right now it's a very close race, and I think it's liable to be a close race all the way to the wire.
Okay, over here.
Can you discuss the philosophy of candidates in Congress concerning Supreme Court appointments and appellate court vacancies?
That's a very good question, because that's why this is very important. A lot of the old Reagan judges are about to retire or otherwise leave the scene. The next president will be naming a lot of judges. This Democratic Senate is not confirming George W. Bush's nominees, and so the next president is going to either be naming judges at the appellate level, the district level, and the Supreme Court level, very much like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer or if Mr. McCain is in, like John Roberts and Judge Alito. So it's one of the big issues. You asked, do you like Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito? If you like him, you better vote. Consider voting for McCain. If you don't like them, you better consider voting against him.
Okay, who did I ask? Was that okay?
What do you expect to happen in the first 100 days of the new administration from either candidate, and what in actuality do you think they're going to promise to have happen in the first 100 days?
Al, you want to take a shot at that?
Well, if either Hillary or Obama are elected with a Democratic Congress, then there will be quick moves made towards setting a timetable to get out of Iraq. If John McCain is elected, I think he will, well, it's 4 more years of George Bush, domestically and internationally.
Yeah. Roger, you want to take a shot at that?
I'm not, I think once they take the oath and they don't have the campaign promises hanging over them so prominently, I think there'll be a slowdown on the policy of getting out of Iran. I think they're going to think very carefully before they embark on any hard plan to withdraw from Iraq. I think it will take at least a year and a half or more to withdraw. But that would be, if a Democrat is elected, I think that would be the first thing that the nation would expect from the new president.
Over here.
Yeah, I want to preface this by saying this question is a little bit not consistent with what we've been talking about, but I told my wife I would ask you this question because she's a reporter and she didn't get to ask it last year. A lot of people around Fort Worth and TCU felt a great deal amount of pride when you occupied the CBS Evening News chair and were disappointed when you left. Do you feel any sense of vindication when the ratings spike that CBS executives were expecting didn't necessarily happen when your replacement took over for you?
Well, I think our time's about up.
No, you have to answer.
Let me answer for you, and then you can pick it up from there. The biggest mistake that CBS has made in its modern history is in moving Bob Schieffer out of the anchor's seat.
Let me just say that I never dreamed that was going to happen. I mean, way back there when Roger and Dan were competing as to who was going to wind up, and they had told me some cock and bull story that I had an outside possibility. It turned out that was just a complete lie to replace Walter Cronkite. It was just a way to get me to come up and anchor the morning news, and which was a disaster in itself. And when Dan got the job, I thought we're so close in age that would never, ever, that job was his. And so I went in and asked to come back to Washington, which was the best decision I ever made in life, and lived happily ever after. So when this all happened, I was stunned. I was totally stunned. But I did it. It turned out to be one of the great adventures of my life. I loved every single minute of it. I thought I knew all you needed to know about television and television news. I learned something new every day, and kind of getting everybody to just in a better humor and thinking about what was ahead of us and not what was behind us. I was very proud of that. But the other part was I didn't want to do it forever. I mean, I was of an age that I thought that they needed to pick someone that could be around for 10 years or so, and I didn't want to be around for 10 years or so. I would not have picked myself to be the permanent replacement. And so what happened. I think the newscast is settled in now. I think we're doing a good job. I think we have a good broadcast. I think it's good and solid, and I wish Katie the absolute best, and I want to help her in every single way that I could. But in a funny kind of way, it just ended perfectly for me, and so I loved it. But now that's past, and now I'm very happy doing what I'm doing.
Can I tell a story about Schieffer? when he came to the Bureau in 1969,
69.
we didn't think he was going to be very good. And but he'd come back to Texas, and he had a CB radio in his car, and we heard when he was down here on vacation that his handle was Anchor. So I got Richard Salant, who was the president of CBS, to sign a piece of blank stationery, official letterhead on it, and I said, Dick, you got to trust me. So I took this blank piece of paper back and addressed it to Bob Schieffer, and it said, Dear Bob, I understand that when you go to Texas on vacation, you are using as your handle Anchor. The term anchor at CBS is never lightly bestowed. It is awarded only after years of faithful, loyal, hard work. Walter Cronkite is an anchor. Charles Kuralt is an anchor. Mike Wallace is an anchor. Roger Mudd is an anchor. You are not an anchor. If it comes to my attention that you continue to use the word anchor, I expect to see you in my office within 24 hours. It took Bob about 6 months to track it down. Tom Brokaw helped him find me. The phone rang, I picked it up, and he said, You son of a bitch.
Unfortunately, that story is absolutely true. And it did take me about 6 months because Richard Salant was such a straight arrow that I'd look at that letter and I'd say, this has got to be a joke. And then I'd say, no, Salant might really feel that way. But finally, I finally figured out that it was Roger Mudd. I mean, I can't tell you how Roger used to treat me when I came. I was very ambitious when I first got there, and I'd worry if I didn't get on the evening news that night, and I'd be so upset, and then I'd get a phone call, and I'd get this phone call, and it'd be this heavily Southern voice. Mr. Schieffer, my wife and I are worried. We haven't seen you on TV. We just wondered if you've been sick or something. I would bite every time. And it was him, I tell you. But I'll tell you, that was the greatest bureau in the history of journalism. And you weren't really part of it until you had kind of gone through the little hazing. We used to all sit around and watch the evening news at night. And one night, for some strange reason, I pronounced tenterhooks. And they started throwing things at me when they saw this. But once you kind of got through that, then you were kind of part of the team. And it was a great team. It was the formative, really, experience of my life, being part of that bureau. And I hope, I say this, it sounds like a commercial, because it is, but Roger has written this wonderful book about those days, and it made me laugh, and I had a tear or two. But there's some wonderful political stories in it. So
it's on sale,
and I think all of you would really, really enjoy it. Well, I think we have. I'm sorry to say, it looks like we have. The time is up, and once again, I want to thank everybody for coming. I'm always astonished. When I go out and do these things, my wife thinks nobody comes. And so I'm glad she's here tonight, and she sees this wonderful turnout we've had. And we're really doing some great things over at the Journalism School. And having you all here makes me very, very proud. Thank you all very much. Thank you.